Hi, everybody. Hi. Hello. My name, of course, is Alma Hexblade, your head guildmaster and chief barista. Happy Finding Out Saturday. No one's gonna tell. No one's gonna say that I lied. No one said that we weren't having a Friday stream, so we are having it now. On what is definitely Friday and most certainly not Saturday, June 11th, in the fantasy year 2022. Listen, guild work was heavy. Okay, like I couldn't really get anything. I it was a lot. And who knew that taking care of yourself and taking a shower and eating did very good. So there's that. Also, update from last stream. Apparently, I've been doing these streams for months now without realizing that I did not have the compressor on for my microphone and all my settings. So that's why I sounded like complete ass. Well, the mic, yeah, that's why all my audio was too quiet and also complete ass. So now it's better, and everyone can hear me, and there's no volume issues anymore, and people will be able to hear me. Did I also mention that people will be able to hear me? Anyway, today's videos. Let's just get started. Let's just already get started. We don't need no introductions. Is it this button? Is it this button? Yeah, it's this button. Okay. All right. So first, we're gonna get started with a video from. This just kind of came out, and I thought it was very silly, so that's why I put it in here. Um, this is a video from Hugh Jeffries, obviously, and it's about a fake Galaxy S22 Ultra. And for comparison, this is what an S22 Ultra looks like. Okay? Keep that in your mind's eye. We're going to see how bad this is. Why would a compressor make it easier to hear? I thought those two were prevent peaking. Compressors, basically what they do is that... Okay, so let's imagine a sound wave, right? And it has peaks and valleys in terms of, like, volume. So, like, sometimes there might be a volume when it's, like, super low, and there's times when the P volume goes, like, kind of high or whatever, right? And now think about the distance between those two. And that's definitely not the best. You might... It'll cause issues where, like, the audio in certain bits is too quiet and you won't be able to hear things, or it gets too loud and it becomes uncomfortable to hear. So what a compressor does is that it lowers the ceiling and raises the floor, so all the audio is more at a more even volume, to make sure that it evens the volume levels of all the audio, so everything sounds about the same volume, which is good. And the reason why it prevents peaking is because, as I mentioned before, it lowers that ceiling I mentioned. Lowers that ceiling. So when you do peak, or so when you do scream or whatever, if you go too high, you're gonna peak and the audio signal is gonna get lost. If you compress it down, you'll hear the entire, all the sound you'll hear all the frequencies just at a lower volume, and that's why it prevents peaking. I think that's a good explanation. I better be right. It's also how people get that it's also how people get that very smooth and suave radio voice, where it doesn't necessarily matter if you're whispering super quiet, like ASMR, or being really, really loud. The audio for it stays the same. Like, you can still hear them in between no matter what. Brandon, I can't tell if you said thanks or THX. You mean the audio thing. Also, Lily, no, Lily is right. You're, excuse me? No, I'm pretty sure here, y'all are gay. You guys. Not, I mean, me, sure. Not as much as you guys. Pointing at you. Over there. Okay, anyway. I'm going to gay you. We'll see. You'll gay me in trial by combat. Anyway, let's look at this fake phone. Fake phone?
Hi guys, welcome back to another Hugh Jeffries video.
Oh, this is already a good start.
This Galaxy S22 Ultra I purchased from AliExpress.
Oh my god. What the it already looks terrible.
$123 for the 256 gig model with 8 gigs of RAM. This is of course not a real Samsung phone.
It looks like
but
a
could
prop.
This phone give big brands a run for their money? Or is there something else going on with this device? It's advertised with having 16 megapixel cameras.
It looks like a prop.
800 milliamp hour battery and a 10-core MediaTek 6889 processor.
What the hell?
Greatly reducing the probability of stagnation, crash, and so on, so that you can snatch red packets faster. If you think
What? This is, well, it's AliExpress tier.
that's impressive,
Same tier.
around back, you'll find not one, not two cameras, but 32 million high definition cameras, all of which are equipped
32 million cameras.
and introduce AL artificial intelligence, along with the Rubik's Cube technology. This is
No. Oh, whoops, it disappeared. Rubik's Cube technology? I'm sorry? Why does it have Rubik's Cube technology?
professional imaging team.
I'm already having such a
But
good
it just
time.
keeps getting better with a screen fingerprint unlockable under the screen, which
Ooh.
contains advanced technology.
Under the screen, hold on. This is so good. Under the screen, it contains advanced technology, innovative screen fingerprints, light, touch and flash unlock. I always figured it was more, it's kind of bad, but it's cheap and not landfill tier. Yeah, AliExpress is pretty not landfill tier. Like, it's like, if you need something, sure. But I wish it's landfill tier.
That's something we're definitely
This
gonna
is
have
still,
to check.
this is all still
All
great.
this with a 4.7 star rating. This must be something really special.
The average
So I
4.7
ordered one
stars.
to
I
see for
wonder
myself.
why.
After all, I've always wanted a phone with Rubik's Cube technology.
Rubik's Cube technology?
Inside is a plain black box labeled S22 Ultra and 256 gigabytes.
Oh man, it looks like an official Samsung product.
Along with various regulation logos.
Oh man, I can't wait to spend $1 bajillion on
Hasn't been
this.
approved for use by the regulation bodies listed. But let's open the box and see what's inside.
Oh, also, I need to adjust
Here
the
we
cropping
have
on
the
this.
S22 Ultra and the included comical S Pen, which is nothing like the original
Pen.
and isn't designed to be stored inside the phone. Included
S Pen? That's an S Pen. How much do those things cost? They're like, aren't they like stupid? Aren't S Pens like stupid expensive?
to be stored inside the phone.
Great
Included
stylus.
alongside the phone and stylus is a clear case and spare screen protector, as well as a knockoff Samsung charger
Uh-oh.
that weighs next to nothing and will likely burn your house down. Additionally, you'll
Fire
find a USB
hazards?
cable, headphones,
Maybe good.
a SIM adapter that provides no use,
Crummy.
and finally, a manual. Before we take a closer look at the phone, I'll remove all the plastic protective film that's been applied.
At least it comes with a case and screen protector. You still don't get those on modern phones anyway, so that's a benefit.
It's fair to say this phone comes with more accessories than most flagships, and it even includes a headphone jack. But is it all too good to be true?
That's a positive so
Where's the
far.
32 million cameras I was promised.
30
I can only hope that was just some poor translation. But we'll have to see just what's inside this phone so I can validate some of their claims.
Oh,
There are some things I can
Oh,
validate in the
no.
software first to see if I got what was advertised. In the About Phone section, you can see the model is displayed as a Samsung S22 Ultra with 8
Okay.
gigs of RAM, 256 gigs of storage, a 10-core Snapdragon processor, and
Oh.
Android 11.
it says it has a fake Snapdragon 888 in it.
The processor being displayed is totally different than the listing, but it's
Oh,
still
no.
a high-end chip.
Oh, the serial number. The serial number.
The processor being
What was
displayed
it?
is totally different than the
Yeah, there it is. 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, A, B, C, D, E, F. Oh, this is good. Do you have like a mechanical thing that makes a consistent noise or something? The keyboard?
listing, but it's
Oh, you might be hearing my air conditioner. Hold on.
still a high-end chip. Or is it? Having experienced Chinese phones with fake specs, I don't trust what I see. I purchased an iPhone 13 Pro clone recently.
Yeah.
And just about every spec listed was fake.
Yeah, it was the
From
AC.
the CPU to amount of RAM and even the Android version. But
Did
what
not
I didn't find
realize
in that
how loud
video
it was.
the
Sorry.
hidden app that's used to fake these specs, or the real company behind these phones. But that's about to change with this S22. Before I show you their secret, I want to demonstrate the fingerprint reader and its so-called advanced technology. I'll set up a fingerprint by placing my finger on the designated area, allowing the phone to scan it. Once complete, we can try it out. Sure enough, the phone unlocks on the first try. But if you were paying attention, you'd notice the fingerprint scanning area on the lock screen is in a different location to when I programmed in my fingerprint. That's because this phone doesn't actually have a fingerprint reader under the display, and that means you can unlock the phone using any finger, or even your knuckle, because it never actually scanned anything when we added the fingerprint. The unlock is entirely dependent on you touching the logo for a second, which bypasses the password and unlocks the phone.
Amazing
It also has
security.
a face unlock method that is software based, so would likely be better than the fake fingerprint, but I wouldn't be trusting it. Given this phone's current track record with security,
Oh no, it has Android Go on it. No. This thing's probably absolute landfill.
I was skeptical of the installed apps like Facebook, Netflix, and TikTok. Are they legitimate versions or have they been modified in some way? I did find a strange message in settings for TikTok saying that it would not infringe on the interests of users. Please open with confidence. I thought that sounded really odd, but after confirming with a friend who also had the app installed on his real Galaxy S22 Ultra, it seemed this was a real message from TikTok. As for the legitimacy of the apps, I tried updating them using an APK file. While this worked for Netflix, it failed for TikTok. I don't know if this is because...
I mean, yeah, you can run Go apps on a regular phone, but the fact that it's there does not give me hope.
Into anything on this device. But the sketchy software doesn't stop there. The
What?
browser app, which is disguised behind a Google Chrome logo, requests permission to take pictures and video,
Ooh.
access location, record audio, access your files, and contacts.
Yikes.
Crashes the app. Why would any legitimate web browser need access to your contacts or camera? In Quick Shortcut Maker, I could gain access to every app's activities. I want to have a look and try and find that secret app I was informed about after posting my fake iPhone 13 video.
Secret
It
app?
didn't take long before I found an app by King Time, Device Info. Opening it, we get a look at the real device's specifications. No
Ooh.
surprise, it's nothing what was advertised. The processor is actually a MediaTek MT6580, a 2016 bare-bones CPU with only 3G networking. A far cry from the blazing fast 5G I was supposed to have. It's also running Android 8.1 with a 480p display, 1GB of RAM, and 8GB of storage.
Damn.
Continuing my search, I also found a device test mode from MediaTek, the company who made the CPU that's inside this phone. The app isn't of any interest as it's just a factory test mode. I found another test mode, this one from King Time, the same name who created the first app we opened with the device specs. It basically performs the same tasks as the factory test mode from MediaTek. The last app of interest was Switch App from KST. This is what we've been looking for. The app would usually be launched via the phone app using a special code, however I don't know what that code is, but using my backdoor method has worked just as well.
Oh, hey, you can mod
the
it.
application used by these scammers to falsify the device specifications, to make it appear as they please. The truth is, if you paid more for storage, all they had to do was change one of these settings and the phone will reflect the change. Obviously, this doesn't change the real hardware of the phone, meaning no matter what you select, you'll only have 8GB of storage. There is even an option to change the model, so I can crank this S22 Ultra all the way up to an S40 Ultra. Sorry Samsung, but I'm 18 years ahead over here with my S40 Ultra.
Is
I can
this
even
what you call
overclock those
overclocking?
32 million rear cameras to 6400 watts, a spec that makes no sense whatsoever as this isn't a measurement used by cameras.
Extreme overclocking.
But once I've made my changes, I can go back into settings where my adjustments are reflected.
This is what
Just
hacking
like
is,
that,
I
I've
think.
upgraded to 32 gigs of RAM, 1 terabyte of storage, and Android 12, all without even turning off the phone.
Wow.
In the storage section, you can see it's lost when it comes to used storage. I'm apparently using 4 times the actual storage of the phone just for the OS. Obviously, this is one heavily modified version of Android, with more backdoors than I think even the FBI put into their Anom phone that was designed to catch criminals. I did also want to attempt to decompile the app and modify some of the values so I could have some really stupid specs, like 6G networking. But what I did find was unused or hidden values, like writing an IMEI number.
Ooh.
And this got me to look up my IMEI number of this very phone, and it comes back as a real Galaxy S22 Ultra. That means they've likely stolen a real S22 IMEI number and just written it to this phone.
Uh-oh.
I did find some other code files suggesting Welcome isn't the only brand name they use, but nothing else too interesting. I made my modification and rebuilt the app for installation. It failed as the signatures don't match. To fix this, you'd need to uninstall the current app. However, as it's a system application, I wasn't able to, meaning I can't install my modified version. I really wanted to know who is the real company behind these phones, because the Welcome brand is just an alias. The factory test app was created by someone called King Sentime, so that's where I started. A web search later, and I believe I found the real company, KST Microhand. I assume KST is King Sentime abbreviated. With KST also being the same name found on the fake specification switcher, I was pretty confident. Looking at their product page confirms my speculation. All these phones look to be clones of big name brands like Samsung, Apple, LG, and HTC. Interestingly, they do actually state the real specs on the product listings. I also found a diagram entitled Way of Thinking and Design, with an infinite loop suggesting the creation of a product.
What is this? This is the most business... This is a very business chart. I like the part here that says think. Think. Do not observe insight opportunity. Don't do these two things. Design. Make and break it infinitely. Build. What is... It's an RSS logo. What is this? Foreign business graphics are worse than normal business graphics.
And it breaking. Sounds about right. I think it's actually time we take a look inside. After the back of the phone has been heated, I can begin prying it open. To my surprise, the back is actually glass. Despite that, I'm yet to find the 32 million advertised cameras, but we did get 4, so I suppose that's quite good.
How many cameras are fake? I think at least 3 of them.
After the back has been loosened, it can be removed from the phone, revealing the insides of this clone. I'll need to unfasten all of the Phillips head screws, securing the mid-frame onto the display.
I should probably boost the volume for this. It's quiet.
After the SIM tray is removed, I can pry off the mid-frame. I shouldn't be surprised, but it's made of cheap plastic, not metal as advertised in the product listing. I mean, what else could they possibly lie about at this point? Oh, the cameras.
Oh, there it is!
Now, 3 of them are fake. So we've gone from 32 million to just 1.
Yes!
This is a very common practice in Chinese phones, and not just the clones either. But now that we have the mid-frame...
I know why. This is always my favorite thing about the fake phones. It has like a bajillion cameras on the back, and then it's just 1. And it's probably pretty lame too, and then all these are fake.
Proper look at the internals of this phone. It looks very similar to the iPhone 13 clone I looked at recently. The battery has no markings indicating capacity, but it's estimated about 2,200 mAh, just 32% of the advertised capacity. While the charging port can be replaced, many other components are soldered in place, such as the battery, vibration motor, speaker, microphone, LED flash, and earpiece.
Does that have a SIM
Not
card
a very
tray?
repairable phone, let alone much of a phone at all. While we've uncovered the true specifications, it's also listed on that orange sticker that's taped onto the motherboard. With not much more to see internally, it's time I get this phone reassembled.
No, destroy it. Aw. It's amazing how they can make just such cheap smartphones. I think that's a pretty interesting fact. Just that concept's like super neat.
Once I've installed all the Phillips head screws, I can attach the back. Oh wait, I forgot to put in the fake cameras. Once those are attached, the back panel can be reinstalled.
Oh, the fake cameras always
And
get
we're
me.
done.
It's so dumb.
So this is it, the most pathetic phone of all time. Powered by shady business practices and equipped with deceitful hardware, this is the latest in manufactured e-waste. As requested in my previous video, I sent all the evidence to the seller, including a link to the video, which he couldn't even access due to censorship. Despite this, I provided every bit of evidence, but he stood his ground, saying I was the person in the wrong. Honestly, it was like talking to a brick wall. But now I'll proceed in getting a refund, as no scammer deserves my money. And on that note, this has been a Hugh Jeffries video. If you like what you saw, hit that subscribe button and consider checking out the scam busting playlist for more videos just like this one. And if you're looking for any used devices, be sure to check out my online store, link for which is down in the description.
I don't know why. There's a lot to this that I love. The fact that, well, I mean, let's go over my favorites. Is that the fake cameras, the fake 32 million cameras, whatever the hell this S Pen is, quote unquote S Pen, and then the fire hazard charger. The China warehouse specials are always so good because they're bound to set something on fire. Man. All right. We're transitioning now from fake phone that was sold to real product, Weird Boy, that was also sold. But it's a cool one. It's a funky boy. This video is from This Does Not Compute, and it's titled "This Strange Retro Laptop Isn't What It Seems."
Colin, how's it going? The late
put
1990s saw a big increase in the popularity of laptops, as well as the rapid evolution of handheld personal digital assistants. Each had its own strengths and weaknesses, so in 1998, Microsoft tried to capitalize on the best features of both. Sharp's PV6000, also known as the Mobilon Tripad, was a device meant to create a new market. Folded up, it resembled a laptop, but opening it revealed a much more flexible arrangement of parts. The display was double hinged to reveal a keyboard in the base, and it could be used like an ordinary notebook. But that display could also flip around to put the device in tablet mode.
I saw Putty. Hold on. Putty, come here. Hey. So already off the bat, you get weirdly close to actual laptops in the market. Like this is almost like one of those like the Surface Studio laptops that Microsoft tried to sell.
Double hinged to reveal a keyboard in the base, and it could be used like an ordinary notebook. But that display could also flip around to put the device in tablet mode. And in either setup, instead of a mouse, one used a passive stylus on the tripad's resistive touchscreen. Connectivity was pretty limited. The left side featured an infrared transceiver, modem jack, special dock connector port, and the DC power input. The right side was even more sparse, with just a Type 2 PC card slot. And that was it. No USB, no parallel, no way to connect even an external keyboard or mouse. This was entirely intentional because this wasn't meant to be a traditional Windows 98 laptop. In fact, it didn't even run Windows 98 at all. Instead, it used Windows CE. The Tripad was one of the first
Windows CE, from my limited use, is terrible and is rightfully stopped existing very soon.
Called handheld PC professional devices. This platform was more commonly known at the time as Jupiter by its internal Microsoft codename, and it was a big change from previous Windows CE products. Most of those were palm-sized devices, with Hewlett-Packard's models perhaps being the most recognizable, though other manufacturers, including Sharp, produced them.
Yeah, I love these
Their
palm
small
top ones.
size
They're so
made 'em
cute.
very pocketable, but also difficult to be productive with. Laptops, by comparison, were much more useful, given their larger screens and dramatically more comfortable
Chunky.
keyboards.
Big.
But they were sometimes a burden to carry around, and their prices were off-putting to some buyers. Jupiter devices were designed to straddle the line between PDAs and notebooks, offering a more traditional form factor while prioritizing lightweight and long battery life.
It's like they tried to make tablets before tablets happened. People are always ahead of the curve. Sometimes things just don't work out.
Sharp's TriPad was one of the first of these machines, except Sharp didn't actually design it. Instead, it was licensed from a company called Vadim, who up to that point had been a manufacturer of mobile device components. Vadim's Clio was its first consumer product, and along with the otherwise identical TriPad, made a bit of a splash in the tech news circles when it launched in late 1998. Initial blurbs about the pair were positive. The promise of a laptop-like device with a battery life
Oh my god, it's $1,000
of 12 hours or more
in like
was
90s
pretty
money.
appealing, but their other features were to
Oh, I'm scared.
right amazing. 9.5-inch color LCD, touch typable keyboard, a thickness of less than an inch or about 3 centimeters, and a weight of 3.5 pounds or 1.5 kilograms. Those last two figures were at least half that of a mainstream laptop at the time, and the list price of $1,000 US was a sizable chunk smaller, too. But looks, as they say, can be deceiving, and the long-term reviews weren't quite so rosy.
Spoilers, it runs Windows CE. Can you guess what the result was? I wonder. Oh boy.
Common complaints were centered around the display, which didn't get very bright and had a washed-out look. It was also slow. Windows CE devices usually relied on low-power, reduced instruction set CPUs instead of the typical processors from Intel or AMD. But the Clio and TriPad relied on a chip from NEC that was clocked at only 84 MHz. The inclusion of an almost full-size keyboard was a major benefit. Key feel was decent, though not exceptional, as it was of the rubber dome variety. But its curved design had a mixed reception. Some found
Oh, I didn't even notice it was curved. Why?
it perfectly usable. It was of the rubber dome variety.
Hold on, wait.
But its
It's not even like ergonomic curved. It's just like someone decided to be funky in the 90s and wanted to embrace 2000s design and have everything kind of gooey.
its curved design had a mixed reception. Some found it perfectly usable, while others said that they would inadvertently miss keys or hit the wrong ones. Storage was another concern. The machines shipped with 16 megabytes of RAM, which in and of itself wasn't horrible for the time. But like most CE devices, the RAM also needed to double as user file storage. Out of the box, they came with 24 megabytes of ROM, but that was reserved for the OS and pre-installed apps, and wasn't able to be written to. So users had to choose how much RAM they wanted to reserve for their files versus any additional applications they wanted to install and use.
Horrendous. Absolutely horrendous. On one hand, imagine asking the user to do this themselves and have them understand what the hell is going on. But also, what the flying hell? You're telling me if the battery on this thing runs dry, I lose my data?
This was a typical arrangement with PDAs at the time, as flash memory was fairly expensive. It also came with some risk. Since RAM required constant power to retain its contents, one needed to be mindful of the status of the backup battery. Thankfully, there was a control panel where you could keep an eye on it. If 16 megabytes wasn't enough, one could spring for the 32 megabyte RAM expansion option, and there was also a compact flash card slot hidden in the battery compartment.
Okay, see if flash
Either
isn't
of
bad.
these, of course, came at additional expense.
Still sucks though.
A major benefit to the use of solid-state storage, though, was that the machine never needed to be fully shut down. Instead, it would simply be put into standby mode, and waking it up again was very quick, just a couple of seconds. There does seem to be some kind of bug related to standby and the touchscreen on at least this unit, as waking it up causes the stylus calibration to go out of whack. It's hard to say whether all of these suffered from this problem, but one review did mention touchscreen responsiveness problems, so it's possible that others had to deal with it too. The biggest issue, though, wasn't one specific to this hardware. The catch to Microsoft's promise of lightweight, efficient laptops was Windows CE itself. Its feature set was dramatically trimmed down from the main Windows product line, and while it came with the Office suite, all the apps were limited in what they could do. Basic word processing and spreadsheets were no problem, but PowerPoint didn't allow for creating new presentations, only viewing them and making minor edits. Jupyter devices also supported handwriting recognition, but what you could do with it was equally limited.
It's cool. Although, imagine trying to use this for
Synchronizing files
productivity.
with a PC then was a common occurrence.
Would
yet a
absolutely
cumbersome
suck.
one. Unless you spent extra for a network PC card, you were stuck using either infrared or the serial port cable to connect directly to a host PC. Due to the machine's thin profile, this meant hooking up the travel dock, which was really just
Yo, dongles! Dongles in the late 90s! History is a flat circle! We've returned to dongle!
just a DE9 adapter with a pass-through power socket. In some cases, it would have been easier to simply email
Dong,
yourself
hashtag dong life.
as the Outlook mail client, along with Internet Explorer, was built in.
At least it came with Internet Explorer.
Of course, the TriPad and Clio weren't the only devices in the Jupyter line. One that reviewers preferred was IBM's WorkPad Z50 from 1999. It came in at a similar price, but used a traditional laptop form factor, complete with trackpoint nub, instead of relying on a stylus. Otherwise, most Jupyter devices had the same hardware and storage limitations. Vadim tried to address this with a second revision of the Clio, which doubled the CPU speed to 168 MHz and the RAM to 32 MB, along with bumping the built-in modem to 56K, up from 33.6. Ultimately, Jupyter devices never really took off. Other than a few niche cases where large companies developed specific workflows around them, their adoption as travel companions was hampered severely by a lack of software
Clio
support.
reminds me of
Plenty
Sony's
of
Palm
people
OS
were
BD.
still willing
At least that was running Palm OS, and that was at least a bit more mature than, other things.
carry regular Windows laptops around with them.
Like, I don't know, Windows
Developers
CE.
had little interest in rewriting their applications for and dealing with the inherent limitations of Windows CE. The Jupyter laptop revolution simply never came. If you like the video, I'd appreciate a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. You can follow me on social media at this.
What is it with the Microsoft always failing to make stripped down versions of their OSs? Long story short, they don't really know what their customer base wants. I'm pretty sure that's probably the best explanation I could give you. Because no, seriously, why would Microsoft know what in the hell their customers want? They've done this so many times and they failed so many times. Anyway, that was the video. It was very good. Also, I think once you got rid of Windows' legacy support, you really don't have a ton of reason. Yeah, the only reason why we use Windows and everybody use Windows now is just the fact that it supports old stuff and all the amazing legacy compatibility it has. I know it doesn't have a lot of compatibility in certain circumstances, but in comparison to a lot of old other operating systems, of which there are a few, Windows is pretty good at it. Like, you can run stuff from Windows 3.1 on Windows 11 if you have the right files and the right programs. So like that's relatively unheard of, you know? All right. Let's move on. We're going to go into the wild funny world of video games, and we're going to talk about Hades and the dialogue system in Hades. You know? Yeah, Microsoft won't do stuff like kill OpenGL out of the blue. Right? Unlike other companies. Right? Anyway. This is from People Meek. Instead, they fill your OS with ads. I wonder what's better. Okay, so this one we're talking about Hades. This is from People Make Games. Yesterday, or 2 days ago, I was streaming Hades and thought about the dialogue. And how ridiculously complicated that system is, probably, to get new lines every single time. I don't think I've heard a dialogue option once. It's insane. Or like I've never heard a repeat of a dialogue option once. That's insane. So let's see how they do it. It's Cerberus, good puppy.
Hades, just like everything that Supergiant Games makes, is filled to the brim with observations about you, the player. There's one I really like in the first boss fight with Meg, for example, that begins with this line.
That mirror's made you stronger, Zagreus. You're fortunate to have Nyx helping you.
She's basically telling Zag here that he wouldn't stand a chance against her without all of those upgrades that you've steadily been unlocking for him as you play. It's a pretty solid burn, to be honest. However, if you then, on your next run, remove all of those upgrades, which almost nobody will ever do, by the way, she references that in the next fight.
I sense something different about you, Zagreus. Your old weakness. Ah, the mirror. I thought you said you weren't trying to compete with me.
Whoa.
It's a tiny, tiny detail, and one that I can't imagine many players will ever experience firsthand, but if you do, man, that's pretty great. Now, Supergiant has spent the last decade creating games that do exactly this, that tell their players, hey, we see you, we care about what you're doing right now, even the seemingly unimportant stuff. In fact, especially that stuff. It's why Bastion's narrator says things like,
Kid better watch his step.
It's why Transistor jokes about you taking too long to figure out a puzzle.
Let's pretend that never happened.
And it's why the text in Pyre doesn't just say you won your last right, it describes it as a one-sided contest. But the studio's latest title, Hades, belongs to a genre that isn't typically associated with the kind of storytelling we expect from Hades. Roguelikes, by their very nature, are all about failure, repeated failure, with the player needing to start all over again from scratch whenever they mess up too badly. And that process provides a significant challenge to the narrative if every time the player messes up,
Man tries to desperately eat a pomegranate and fails.
Supergiant Games makes is filled to the brim with observations about you, the player. I am just kidding, but you get the idea. Imagine two players, right? One of them somehow rolls
Shit,
the credits
like,
on
this
Hades
is why
after
video
their
games are
10th
cool.
run with just 5 hours spent playing the game, while the other won't get there until their 100th.
Yeah. I wish more game devs acknowledge the fact you're in an interactive medium built mechanics and story about. There are some who understand that, and then there are people who don't, and then those games kind of are not as well remembered.
On the clock.
Unfortunate.
How do you possibly provide a compelling narrative arc that works for both of these players? Well, here's one bad option that comes to mind. You could make sure that your story works for player 1 and their perfect playthrough, and then use that exact same structure for player 2 as well, but only offer up new dialogue and new story beats when they actually make some form of progress. In the meantime, I don't know, just repeat whatever they've heard already. But here's the thing about Hades. If you know anything about this game, you'll know that Theseus is a piece of shit.
Yeah.
Just a really bad man.
Yeah.
I'm really sorry, that wasn't the point I was supposed to make.
No, but DC's a piece of
Does
shit.
an
It's
amazing
okay.
job at offering up brand new dialogue all the time, and even after dozens of hours, most players will have never heard a single line be repeated. So how has Supergiant pulled that off? Well, the answer to that question begins with the game's script. It's 300,000 words long, which, by the way, is a bigger word count than the Game of Thrones, and you know George R.R. doesn't write a short tale. And according to Supergiant's Greg Casavin, at least 2/3 of that script is fully voiced.
I did not expect that Hades would end up with a bigger script than Pyre, because Pyre is a very story-heavy game.
That's a lot. I hope this voice actor's got paid a
The
bunch.
sheer quantity of words isn't enough on its own to solve that bigger problem of players progressing through Hades at different speeds. Not if Supergiant want their game to respond to those players and their progress in a way that feels personal.
And what we did was we embraced the randomness inherent to the roguelike genre, even for the narrative.
So what does that mean? Well, when Zagreus runs up to Nyx, for example,
It is an
and
indie
he's
game.
talking with her, there's a long list.
So, I mean, yeah, but it's a very big minigame.
In that moment. There's plenty more than you can see here, but let's pretend for now that there are just 6. The game essentially rolls a dice and then uses that random number to decide which one of these it's going to use.
Nyx, I have to ask you something.
Once that conversation has been exhausted, it's then taken out of the pool until the player has gone through all the other possible options. Only then can it be reset and potentially heard once again.
The thing is, if it were always random, it would be kind of nonsensical. So we developed a system that can check increasingly specific conditions. So one of them may be, you have this weapon. One of them may be, you failed to clear the last escape attempt. One of them may be, you have a fish. One of them may be, you have achieved the maximum relationship level with Thanatos, etc., etc.
Thirsty
Okay,
for
so if we
Thanatos.
return to that conversation with Nyx, there's actually 2 categories to consider then. There's the oven-ready stuff that can be used at any point during a playthrough, and then there's this locked dialogue which can only be added into that mix when the correct requirements have been fulfilled. And for some of these locked conversations, like the one that's triggered after you complete your first run of Hades, for example, it's really important that this does actually get used when you next have a conversation with Nyx. That's suddenly become much, much more important than any of these other topics, and so, to bring this whole thing together and ensure the game's narrative does feel reactive, Supergiant also uses a priority system.
So events are
okay.
sort of in a few different priority tiers. So that way I can ensure if some like critical story event happened, a character is going to respond to that instead of like, you know, talk about how that's a nice new weapon you have there or something like that.
This also allows for longer, multi-part stories to be told across multiple conversations. If you talk to a character about something that needs to be broken up into different parts and then told in a certain order, this system can recognize that, okay, you've had part 1 of this conversation, let's now make sure that part 2 is considered a top priority, so the next time you speak with them, that particular storyline continues. Unless, of course, something even higher on that priority list ends up being triggered first. And that's how Supergiant ended up here, with a narrative experience that both responds to the players but also manages to avoid repetition for as long as possible. It's 4 things really: a massive script, a narrative system that embraces the genre's randomness, a ton of observations about what the player is actually up to, and finally you tie all of that together with a priority system that can make sure that characters do talk about what they're meant to talk about at the right times. Now, each of these ideas can be found in some form in the studio's previous work. Take Bastion, for example, way back in 2011. Not only did it introduce a narrator that could react to the player's actions, but
Wait,
it
Bastion's
too
10 years old?
solved the problem of players progressing at different speeds.
Whoa.
That's why if you blast through an area really quickly, you'll notice the narration speeds up in an effort to match your progress, and it will even skip lines altogether if needed. And that same principle applies to Hades as well,
Yeah,
although here we're talking about
didn't think
the
about
narrative
that.
arc of an
Wow.
entire game rather than just a single level, and the way in which progress can differ is also significantly greater. In fact, only one other Supergiant game really competes with Hades on that front, and it's not Bastion, it's the high fantasy sports game Pyre.
It's hard for me to say if Hades was like a more complicated endeavor than Pyre, but I'll say if not for Pyre, Hades certainly wouldn't exist.
Pyre might not have anywhere near the same quantity of voice acting as Hades, but what it does have is an ensemble cast of characters that, depending on your actions, will either earn their freedom or not. And to put it simply, Pyre's storyline still needs to make sense to a player whether all of them have accomplished that goal, or if none of them have.
The ending of the game has 200 million different permutations narratively.
And so Pyre ends up with a narrative structure that looks like this, beginning in the
Okay.
same way for every single player,
Jeez.
but rapidly branching out in different directions depending on which characters are available. Hades has its own version of this too, particularly when it comes to which of its Olympian gods are encountered and in what order. You'll always meet Athena first, but after her, with a few exceptions, it's then mostly left up to the player to decide, based on which chambers they want to clear.
But it was the first game experience that we've made where kind of after the first few minutes, we just let the game be the game, and kind of trust in the player and trust in ourselves, and also trust in the early access feedback to make sure we haven't gone completely astray.
Those are two words that kept cropping up, by the way, whenever I asked the team about how they made sense of this game. Early access.
Greg does a lot of work basically to make sure certain conversations that would make no sense don't appear and stuff like that. And a lot of that is because he knows how it's supposed to be, but some of that is because a player found a conversation that didn't make as much sense at a certain point in the narrative, and now it won't appear. And maybe an alternate appears instead, or something like that.
And so yes, Hades, just like Pyre, has this big branching narrative that keeps sprouting new appendages based on the actions of the player, but there's also one other wrinkle to consider.
So you can play Hades for 100 hours and never interact with the character of Orpheus, for example. You never have to free him, and even if you do free him, you never have to talk to him. You don't have to do anything. But he has this whole subplot with the character Eurydice that's a big kind of storyline. But like, whether and when you've met Orpheus and Eurydice has a significant impact on how you enter that storyline.
The same goes for a bunch of characters. Take Nyx, for example. She's hugely important to Zag's storyline. In fact, in many ways, she's the catalyst for him trying to escape in the first place. And yet, it's entirely possible for a player to avoid speaking with her entirely until after they've experienced Hades' true ending. Now, are you going to have as good an experience with this game if you play like that? I don't think so, and to be honest, those are some very extreme examples which won't apply to the vast majority of this game's audience. But I think they're a good way of demonstrating how Supergiant is needed to think about the many different player experiences that Hades is meant to accommodate for. Is it a perfect system? No, of course not. There's always going to be a limit to how much new dialogue this game's characters can offer, and I'm sure some of you watching may have hit that point already. But I bet a lot of you haven't. And for a game that's been created by a relatively small team with this much superb voice acting and a storyline that players genuinely care about, that's one hell of an achievement. But seriously, Theseus needs to start treating that Minotaur with more respect. And I don't like his smile.
Speak for yourself, Asterius.
Maybe he would if you'd let him. Now I know what you're thinking. People Make Games sure does know a thing or two about set design. But I'll let you in on a little secret. We're incredibly cheap. That's a duvet cover that we ordered off Amazon, and I've nailed to the wall.
No!
Today's video was sponsored by Skillshare.
Okay, we're skipping the sponsor, but that was neat. It's just like, it's the same way that the branching narrative stuff like that, which enables for like so much gameplay, is one of the reasons why I like playing Hades so much. And why I can just come back to it after not playing it for a while and have a good time just as any other time, and everything feels fresh, you know? Same goes in a way with, like, visual novels. I mean, obviously, visual novels, you have to have a bit more... You have to have longer... You have to have less branches and more content in the branches. But it's the same idea, but the thing with... the thing with visual novels is that there can only be so many branches because you're writing this all out, and you probably don't have a larger budget to accommodate more writing like that because it'll get messy fast. But doing it like the system that Hades has, where it's like a it's like a pseudo random weighted distribution type thing. I'm sure in the math and the mechanics of it is very, very, very cool. Probably more numerically complicated than what they're proposing here. Because it's random, but also there's so many other flags that needs to be triggered to unlock stuff that the code for it probably gets incredibly complicated. But I mean, hey, I'm just playing the video game, and I like the video game, so woo. Okay. What's this next video here? Okay. Next one is we're taking a small little break. We're taking a small little break from technology and embracing tradition while we talk about the science behind a pop-pop boat. Have you guys seen these things? These are adorable. And also they go pop, like a bunch, like, and they go through the water, and it's really cute. Anyway, this video is by Steve Mold. He's a very good science YouTuber. You guys should follow him or subscribe to him. There we go.
Pop boat or a putt-putt.
Oh.
This is a pop-pop boat or a putt-putt boat, and I've seen various different explanations online for how it works.
Look at it go.
So I thought, the only way to know for sure is to build a transparent version. This channel is rapidly becoming the transparent version of things channel. But anyway, let's have a look at the regular pop-pop boat first. You've got this little tank here with two pipes coming out the back, and if you follow those pipes, they come out at the back of the boat under the level of the water. The first thing you have to do is fill the tank and the pipes with water. You then need to light a fire under the tank. In this case, we're using a mini tea light candle. Very quickly, the pop-pop boat starts to make this popping sound and it whizzes around in the water. Now, according to the common explanation, the tank remains full of water until it reaches boiling point. And then you get this sudden release of steam, which forces the water down the tubes. As that steam continues to expand, that follows the water down the tube. The tubes are much cooler than the tank, so the steam condenses back into water. That reduces the pressure inside the tank, and so the water is sucked back into the tank. All the steam condenses, and you're once again left with a full tank of water. Once back inside the hot tank, boiling happens again, and the whole cycle continues. But with the glass version of the pop-pop boat, we should be able to see if that's actually what's going on.
Also, dear God, imagine how accurate you have to be to make this in transparent and glass.
The first thing you notice, actually, is that it's quite hard to fully fill the tank with water with no air trapped inside there. Look, if I don't make any effort to tilt the boat in funny ways to remove air bubbles, this is how much water you get in the tank. Most of it's actually air. It is possible to get rid of almost all the air by tipping the boat upside down whilst you're squeezing water in until you essentially flush the whole system with water. But you don't do that with the metal pop-pop boat. So my assumption is actually there's probably a big bubble of air inside the metal pop-pop boat during operation. The first thing you notice as the tank starts to heat up is that this little pocket of air gets bigger and bigger. Thanks, by the way, to Lee Mulholland and the scientific glassblowing team at the University of Southampton for making this boat. So I imagine two things are happening here. That little bubble of air is expanding because air expands as temperature increases, but also some water vapor is being created, even at these temperatures below the boiling point of water. The gas cavity continues to expand until it reaches these two tubes. And actually, it continues to expand beyond that down into the tubes. But you'll notice there's a little reservoir of water still in the tank. And then at some point, the water in the tube starts to oscillate back and forth inside the tube. By the way, the batteries are only there because the boat was too heavy at the front, though I do appreciate it looks like a really dodgy perpetual motion machine with not so well hidden batteries, but I promise they're only there for the weight. Perhaps the oscillations would occur in different places in the tube, depending on how full the tank was to begin with.
I don't know why. It's so cute looking. It just oscillates and it's just while it goes forward.
Here's a test where I don't make any attempt to fill up the tank. I just make sure the two tubes are full.
If it feels very silly, it's just funny watching things like a system just kind of oscillate like that. I don't know. Maybe that's just my brain just seeing, ooh, it's going back and forth at a rate. It stimulates a neuron somewhere.
A bit of water in there. In this setup, once the gas starts to expand, it fills the two tubes almost entirely. There is still a tiny bit of water left in the tank, which is slowly going down as more and more of it vaporizes. But eventually you do seem to get some oscillation right at the very exit of the exhaust pipes. And that does seem to be enough to get the thing moving. But to go back to the full tank test, well, the oscillations still happen inside the tubes, not in and out of the tank. So, at least with this version of the pop-pop boat, that's where the action is. On the surface, this seems quite different to the description you tend to see online, where the tank fills up with water, then fills up with steam, then fills up with water. But although the reality looks quite different, I believe the method of operation is very similar. The best way to think about it, and actually it's not often described in this way, is in terms of resonance. This packet of gas inside the tank and the tubes is elastic. If you squeeze it, it will push back. And so if you do it in the right way, it will oscillate. It will resonate at its natural frequency, a bit like the air inside this glass syringe. Boing. But you'll notice that the air resonating inside this glass syringe is very damped. The oscillations die away very quickly. So we need some kind of external energy source to keep that oscillation going. And of course, that energy is supplied by the candle. But how exactly? Well, when you have something oscillating with simple harmonic motion and you want to increase the amplitude, or at least stop the amplitude going down because of damping, then obviously the force that you apply needs to be applied with the same frequency. Like, you need to push and pull at the same frequency, but you also need to worry about the timing. Like, if you push when the gas is pulling and you pull when the gas is pushing, that's not going to work. Whenever the gas is expanding, the engine needs to be applying an expanding force. And whenever the gas is contracting, the engine needs to be applying a contracting force. In technical language, that means that the force applied is a quarter of a wavelength out of phase with the displacement of the oscillator. But where does this force come from? Well, it comes from a temperature difference. And that makes sense. Like, if you just uniformly heated up the gas and water inside the engine, well, some things will expand and the temperature will change, but it won't oscillate. For it to oscillate, you need some exchange between hot and cold regions.
You guys are understanding this, right? This is going to be on the test later today. Got it? No, seriously though, this is like kind of pretty freaking interesting. I mean, it's, you know, as someone who has no understanding of this type of thing, I think this is neat.
That's how any heat engine works. For example, the Stirling engine that I use in my video explaining entropy, link in the card in the description. In this case, as the gas expands into the tubes, well, the tubes are much colder, and when a gas gets colder, the pressure goes down. Especially if it's water vapor, because some of that steam will condense back into liquid water, drastically reducing the pressure. But of course, as the gas contracts, it ends up back inside the tank where it's hotter. As the gas heats up, the pressure goes up, and so it expands back into the pipes, and that cycle continues. At this point, you may have worked out that a pop-pop boat doesn't need two pipes. It will work just fine with a single pipe, but having two makes it a lot easier to fill. You squeeze water into one pipe and it expels air out of the other. With the glass pop-pop boat, you don't get the popping sound. That's because with the metal boat, you have this plate of metal on top. And as the pressure goes up and down, that metal plate flexes up and down, causing a popping sound. But there's nothing really flexible about the glass boat, so you don't get the popping sound. The final thing we need to explain is, like, how is it that water going in and out of the exhaust tubes at the back leads to propulsion? Because it's not obvious. Like, intuitively, it's a reciprocating motion. Everything that happens in one direction then immediately happens in reverse. So surely the boat should just go back and forth on the spot and not actually travel anywhere. Well, it's actually reasonably common for a reciprocating mechanism to lead to non-reciprocating motion. Take, for example, the bristlebot. The bristlebot works by vibrating the head of a toothbrush up and down. And that's obviously reciprocating motion, but it leads to forward progress of the bristlebot. If I slowly press down on the head of this toothbrush, it leans forwards on the bristles, and if I slowly let go, it leans back up again. And so that reciprocal motion leads to no change in position. But if you do it quickly, well, first of all, I press down, and that causes the bristlebot to lean forwards. And if I quickly release, well, the bristlebot springs up and the bristles slide forward. And so with each cycle, the bristlebot moves forward. So how does the reciprocating mechanism in the pop-pop boat lead to forward motion? Well, one suggestion is that as the jet of water leaves the exhaust, it's collimated. It's all moving in the same direction. And because every action has an equal and opposite reaction, that causes the boat to move forward. Whereas when the water is drawn back into the pipes, it's drawn in from all directions. So the reverse motion of the boat is weaker. But actually that argument doesn't stand, because all we really care about is the momentum of the water that interacts with the boat. That's the water inside the tube. And it's the same mass of water going forwards as going backwards. The real answer is that after the expulsion phase, the boat can continue to glide forward with the new momentum that it has. Whereas when the water is sucked into the boat, yes, there is an opposite reaction force that pulls the boat back. But at the end of the suction phase, there's essentially a collision. The water slows down inside the tubes because it's colliding with the air inside the tubes, and the air is enclosed within the entire boat system. So, in other words, the reason the water that's being sucked in slows down is because it's colliding with the boat and it's imparting momentum on the boat, which exactly cancels out the reverse momentum as it was being sucked in. In summary, during the expulsion phase, there's no cancellation of the momentum being imparted by the expelled water, but during the suction phase, there is a cancellation. Altogether, that leads to a net forward motion of the boat. Anchor sent me this portable power station to do a quick review at the end of one of my videos. They are paying me, it's important that you know that, but let's just get into the details.
Let's ignore that, even though Anchor is a very good sponsor. You know what? But did you guys understand that? I thought it was neat. Is that it's a combination of a temperature differential and a little pushing motion from the water that gets the thing go fast. It's so neat. I know, it's just like I love tiny little toys like that demonstrate a lot of scientific properties. Maybe I'm just a very STEM person, you know? Okay, let's see here. What other silly videos do we have on here? This one, we should go back to video games. Video games. This one is very interesting, is that this is from a channel called Geeker1. He basically upcycled a smartphone into being a really, really, really cool portable gaming device. I mean, smartphones are already good for gaming devices, but like, even more so. It was very impressive.
Gaming smartphone has become a thing for quite a while. They may have crazy gaming performance with huge battery life, maybe even with an active cooling fan inside. That could be cool. But have you ever wondered one day you can make your own gaming handheld? We can make use of an old smartphone, a controller, a cooling fan, some battery and wires, and do some proper tuning and tweaking on both hardware and software. It can not only perform better than some new flagship smartphones, but also cost way less than you expected. And today, you're gonna see exactly that. Let me introduce you what I call the Mi 90 Pro.
This is also one of the weird things, is like I've never seen hacking done on a phone in this fashion. So this is incredibly dope.
Well, I guess some of you guys have already spotted it's a Xiaomi Mi 9 inside. Yeah, we crank up this Mi 9 pretty hard to make this project happen. But why we choose Mi 9? The most important reason is the chip inside. It's a Snapdragon 855. Thanks to Qualcomm, the CPU performance on Snapdragons hasn't increased that much in recent years, so Snapdragon 855 should already provide us enough CPU horsepower for modern games. The GPU, on the other hand, is a weak point of this old chip, but consider more and more mobile games are running with CPU bottleneck, it should be fine. And most importantly, Mi 9 sells really cheap in China. This unit with a cracked backplate only cost us about 700 yuan. It's about 110 bucks. Pretty crazy deal, right? To be honest, Mi 9 is not so popular worldwide, and this 110 price tag is just too good to be true for the global market. For you guys, I would recommend OnePlus 7T, which is a slightly more expensive but more available phone. You can easily find one under 150 bucks in the used market, or maybe Google Pixel 4, which has a similar price tag. Anyway, an old flagship powered by Snapdragon 855 with decent community support should be fine. Okay, so what we have right now is just a regular cheap retail phone though. To make it a gaming phone, we might have to tune it by a little bit. Let's start with the battery. One of the very common complaints about this Mi 9 is the battery life. 3300 mAh battery may be acceptable for a phone, but definitely not tolerable as a gaming device. So we hooked 2 extra battery cells to the phone, making a total of 9900 mAh battery.
This works. This works. You can just put batteries together and it works.
To put it in comparison, that's more battery life than iPad Pro. As you can see, all 3 battery cells are connected in parallel, sharing one protection board. By the way, you will have to discharge all the battery cells to the same level before hooking them up. And also, we will have to modify the software to tell the system the size of the new battery, so Android will manage the battery like it has never.
I'm surprised they just let you do this. But then again, it's like Linux, so you can just mess with it.
Voila! As we can see in the battery info, our mega battery is good to go. Next, what are we gonna do? The chip. You don't expect me to swap the chip to make an upgrade, right? Well, it's not really an option on smartphone. However, what we can do is overclocking. The factory firmware from Xiaomi has tuned this Snapdragon 855 way too slow. Even though the Prime-Core A76 is clocked at 2.8 GHz by default, it will never reach that peak performance in real-world gaming. In fact, it's not even reaching 2 GHz in our Genshin Impact benchmark. That is not acceptable for gaming. So what are we gonna do? We're gonna boost the CPU clock speed by tuning our CPU governor. That could be done by kernel management software after rooting your phone. You can find.
So what a CPU governor is basically the rules that a CPU uses to determine like what should be like when certain things happen and what frequency the CPU should be running at, basically.
Bunch of them on Play Store. The one we choose is Smart Pack. This fancy little app allowed us to select
back. Thankfully these issues like that don't take like a long time. Let me just get this capture back up and we'll be all good to go. There it is. There we go. Now we're back. Oh no. See? It was like 30 seconds. It was great.
As high as possible at all times. And that's for our CPU. For the GPU, we can also try to overclock the hell out of it. This Adreno 640 GPU in our Snapdragon is clocked at 585 MHz by default. And there is a free and open source overclocking tool called Konabes. With this app installed, we can change the voltage and frequency table of our GPU. And upon our testing and trying, we found our GPU can be overclocked to as high as 840 MHz. That's a 40% uplift. 40% of free GPU
I know,
power
I work so
with
hard.
just some taps on your finger. Wow, this little piece of silicon can do much more than I think. And what else can we overclock? The screen! Yeah, you heard me right. The screen on our Mi 9 is also overclockable. You can overclock this 60Hz panel to a higher refresh rate. This is a community-made custom kernel. What you have to do is download this kernel, rename it with a higher refresh rate, and then flash the kernel in your recovery. Our particular device can run stably at 81 Hz, but the color accuracy is pretty bad if you do so, so we choose a sweet point at 75 Hz. And now
Also, I didn't even know you could overclock mobile displays. This is dope as all hell.
Now I can certainly feel a bit smoother when scrolling through. Just in case you want to try yourself, we put a GitHub link for the software on the description below. Alright, so free performance, free refresh rate, they all come with a cost: heat. You see, Xiaomi limits the hardware for a reason. After our lunatic tuning, the phone is burning like hell right now. When the temperature reaches the limit, the phone will lock itself until cooled down. You don't want that happen when you're about to get a chicken dinner, right? So we definitely have to redesign our custom thermal solution. Take a look inside the phone, we can find the SoC on the back of the motherboard, which means the Snapdragon 855 has been sandwiched by the motherboard in the mid-frame. That is not a configuration where heat can easily come out.
Poor boy,
However,
choking.
since the heat source is contacting with the aluminum midframe, we can apply some thermal compound, moving the heat to the midframe and bring airflow through it. And let's do it. First, we remove the camera module to expose more midframe to the airflow. Camera? Does it even run games? We can definitely ditch that for better thermal and less weight. Then we stick an aluminum cooler with a 40 by 40 mm fan to the back of the motherboard, having sweet air blowing through all the time. To powering up the fan, we need to draw power directly from the battery. Well, battery on the phone usually rated as 3.7 volts and will be a bit higher when fully charged. As we tried, it can still drive this 5-volt fan, but not at full speed. And you know what? We're gonna push everything to its limit, even this tiny little fan. So this is a pre-made DC to DC converter board, which can take 3.7 volts and output 5 volts. We hook this up along with breadboard and 2 switches so you can manually control it and choose the fan speed you like.
It continues to get crazy. Like, I love how this is set up. It's just so nuts. It gets so wild fast.
And this module is just the right size to fill the gap between the battery and the fans. Pretty cool, huh? Now the thermal solution is ready, we can unleash even more performance by disabling the thermal threshold. This is a community-made MIUI thermal control tool called, well, this is obviously pretty well-mannered. You have 5 very easy to understand mode, with this first one being, you know.
Screw it.
By selecting this, Android will no longer care about how hot your phone is. So with our fan running, we are squeezing out every last bit of juice out of this Snapdragon 855. But with all those crazy modifications done, we still have a very important job to do. We need a case. Now we have to design a unique case for this unique phone. And with the help of 3D printing technology, it won't be too hard to manufacture.
We love 3D printers
Design
here.
is pretty straightforward. There are 2 parts of a case held together by screws. One of the most important things is maintaining airflow while protecting our finger from touching the fan. So here, we only left open the blade part, not the middle part. The gap is small enough so you won't hurt your finger. In terms of airflow, cold air goes into the case from back and then goes through the entire motherboard, exhaust to both sides of the phone. So far so good. What's also important is overall shape of the case. I mean, with all the stuff inside, it is really thick and heavy as a phone now. So we definitely want some extra smoothness from the case. We rounded every single corner, making sure no sharp angle can be touched. And now, I think it feels even better than a regular phone by holding. And of course, as a gaming device, it certainly needs to attach a controller. In between these two parts of the case, we reserve some space for a universal accessory mount. And we also designed a controller mount which attaches the phone to an Xbox controller. Since the mount is universal, you can attach more stuff on it like a speaker or a power bank or anything you can think of. So that is our design, and it's time to print that out. We first tried our FDM printer, and that is just not so great. In first couple
Sorry, I'm just like, it just looks terrible. It just fell off. Just bleh.
trial, we got some
on the left-hand
example
side
like this one due to temperature difference between day and night. Even when the printing process goes smooth, the final result is still pretty rough. You can literally see and feel every single layer.
Oh, that's a bad print. Oh,
it's just not feeling like a premium device, right? So we give up on FDM and purchase 3D printing service online. They will manufacture our design by SLA technology, where they're using precise set of laser to solidify resin. And this is our final production. It costs 60 yuan, roughly about 10 bucks.
That's pretty good.
And that worth every single penny. I mean, look at it. So smooth, so much better than what we have done. What a nice job. And after putting them all together, that
I love the
is
stickers
the
on
device
it.
we're talking about.
It looks like pretty good for like a DIY
So
setup,
better
you
than
know?
What we have done. What a nice job. And after putting them all together,
like that looks kind of good.
That
looks good. Like, yeah, resin printing. Oh, hold on. This is getting really high. Like, resin printing has really good results. The detail on it's great, and it basically almost looks like injected molded plastic if you don't look too hard enough. Still, very good.
is the gaming device we're talking about. At this point, everything has been done on this phone. So what is the cost? Total cost, including the phone, we spend 910 yuan in total. It's about 150 US dollars. It might be a bit more expensive in your region, but
although I can imagine that came from way more expensive printers than he has. Yeah, definitely. But like 3D printing services, like that's just kind of how that's just how they go. So I mean, there's nothing you could really do about that. That's just kind of the breaks for this type of device, but still incredibly impressive, of course. Incredibly impressive, especially for what you can do with functionally $150. I mean, it's hard to do this with other stuff because you kind of have to think about what you're doing, more than usual. But so good.
But definitely way cheaper than the new flagship. It is quite a bargain for a gaming device, right? But how it really performs. It's time to test everything out. First, we tried 3D Mark Wildlife Extreme. This is a GPU benchmark, and the 40% overclock we put on it actually translates to a 40% performance boost.
What? This is the thermal limitations the phone processors are hiding from you. Look at that!
Yes, this GPU is on par with the newest Snapdragon 870. And more importantly, with the fan running at full speed, our GPU does not throttle at all. The stress test reported a whopping 98% stability. Yes, no throttling at all on full load. And maybe it's time to step into some real gaming. I mean, seriously demanding games like Genshin Impact. Just for comparison, a standard unmodified Mi 9 averaged at only 39 FPS under high preset. And if we check the CPU frequency, well, it is very, very slow. With the CPU core all below 1.7 GHz, no wonder why the game is so laggy. So now, let me introduce our Mi 90 Pro. Oh wow! With proper tweaking, this old lady can even run at over 50 FPS. That's a whopping 25% performance increase. And now the game is running way smoother than before. It's now feeling like a real gaming phone. In fact, it's even faster than some nowadays flagships like Mi 12 Pro. Look at that! Our Snapdragon 855 is even faster than the latest Snapdragon 8! How ironic is that? And what's more interesting is the power efficiency. This 855 consuming about 6.5 watts at 50 FPS, where Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 consuming 6.8 watts, delivering the same performance. Is that what you call a flagship, Qualcomm? Flagship my ass! But to make it more like a proper gaming handheld, we still need a controller. So we printed an adapter, and with that, we can attach an Xbox controller underneath, and now this Mi 90 Pro looks like a Pro. However, the Android version of Genshin Impact doesn't natively support controller yet, so we have to use this little app called Mantis Gamepad Pro to map the touchscreen with these controller buttons. And we're gonna have to register every single button and the joystick. But look at the bright side, everything
that
is
flagship
configurable.
doesn't need a fan.
Use a controller
It
and
helps
touchscreen
though.
at the same time.
It definitely
I would say
helps.
it's even better than the official controller support on the iOS version. So we kinda nailed it in Genshin Impact. Maybe you should try some even crazier game. This is Alien Isolation, a real AAA title released back in 2014, and recently it has been ported to Android. Because the game originally runs on PC, every single graphic setting can be modified. By editing the config file, you can even unlock some PC-level graphics. Like by default, the game runs at 30 frames per second, but here we can unlock the frame rate to 75.
Alien.
Yeah, that's our refresh rate.
We're changing we're basically changing the INI files at this point. This is wild.
And it just works! The frame rate definitely goes above 60s. Well, we're actually playing, we got only 40-ish. Yeah, it's a PC game, so it is still pretty demanding, I should know it. However, the graphic quality is also PC level. Even we are only at 720p res right now, it looks pretty nice. But we just can't get enough. Remember when I said we can modify the config file? Yes, we are doing exactly that. Doubling our resolution to 1080p and enable every single option like reflection, ambient occlusion, particles, and... well, you wouldn't believe it. Here we have only 15 FPS. Wow, what a huge appetite. That is what we call demand.
But it's running and doesn't look completely like ass. That's like the part I like, is that this doesn't look like it sucks. It looks pretty alright.
Ending, huh? But look at the graphics, the shadows, the lights, the fire, the smokes. It's just gorgeous. I think we just squeezed the last bit of juice out of this Mi 90 Pro now. Other than Android ports, we can also try some emulators like EtherSX2. This is a PS2 emulator for Android.
Oh, now we're talking.
It should be quite demanding for regular phones, but not our Mi 90 Pro.
Now we're in like the
Turismo
real...
4, and the phone runs at 60 FPS under 1080p scaling with no problems. Easy peasy. And also, my personal favorite, Hitman Blood Money. Back in the day, the game is famous for its freedom and playability. Yes, you can eliminate your enemy, put on his clothes, and put his body into a fridge. Classic. When running on our Mi 90 Pro, this game is apparently more demanding than Gran Turismo. We can only get 30-ish FPS at around 900p resolution. But there were more power-hungry titles on PS2. Let me introduce God of War 2. This game was released in 2007 when PS3 is already out for a year. And at the end of the lifespan of PS2, this game really utilized every single bit of performance of the console. On this Mi 90 Pro, we can only run smoothly at 480p, which is the original resolution. But still, play such a classic title on a smartphone, that is really exciting.
And it's 60 FPS.
That's all for today's video. We built our own gaming handheld with overclocking, custom battery, and custom cooling. It runs as fast as a modern flagship where it only costs a quarter of the price. And this whole process of building this thing is just a hell lot of fun. And if you like our video, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. We will have more interesting projects like this.
See, this is why I love this channel. Glorious ad typing. It's just like, this, like, it's so interesting. Like, he just... I mean, some of them are just like he doesn't do a lot on the channel. There's also even sillier stuff like getting Windows 11 on these things. But this is a really good video to show like what you can do with Android phones, especially. Like I bet you like iPhone, as much as like I dock iPhones for this, like iPhones wouldn't be able to do this shit. You kidding me? Look at that.
This is running native.
Brandon, thank you for gifting Rona the sword. I hope Rona enjoys swords. I know that they're a bow user, but it'll work out. Yeah. I don't know why the audio didn't play, but I saw it, so it's okay. Okay. Actually, speaking of, I want to watch the other video that they had about running Windows 11 on the phone. Now you can use the sword to fight off ads, exactly.
This
one's Windows 11 running on a smartphone, by the way.
Is Windows 11 running on a smartphone. I mean, that Windows 11. Not a virtual machine, not a remote desktop. This is running natively on a smartphone. Touchscreens works fine, really smooth, no lags at all. You can see the specs of the phone in Task Manager, which suggests a Qualcomm Snapdragon 845 chip powering this unit. So obviously I'm not lying to you. Actually, this is a OnePlus 6T model running Windows 11. And you can even run some decent AAA titles on that. Seriously, this thing is much more powerful than you think. Pretty impressive, right? Yeah, PC gaming and Windows 11 all on a smartphone. And today, we are going to show you how exactly.
I love how you can see that there's Skyrim on this. Do you guys want to play Skyrim on your smartphone?
This works. Actually, it's not that
I sure
hard
do.
to understand. As you may know, Microsoft does provide an ARM version of Windows, which you can find on Surface Pro X or other ARM-based PCs. Your smartphone, however, is also based on ARM processor. And since Qualcomm is making those processors for both your phones and PCs, some PC drivers can even be compatible with your phones. So running Windows on a smartphone isn't as hard as it sounds. The real problem comes down to the booting process, the UEFI. But how could you load UEFI and boot into Windows on an Android smartphone? Well, to solve the problem, let me introduce you Project Renegade. This is an open source project that helps you to run
open source software, baby.
On smartphone. They came up with this idea of faking your Windows UEFI as a Linux kernel. So when booting from it, your phone will be like, yeah, it's a Linux kernel, so you must be running Android OS, right? No, I'm running Windows 11 instead. With the tools they provide, you can compile UEFI by yourself or just find one that works for your device. And that is the disguised Linux kernel that helps you to boot desktop OS from Android bootloader. And also, they gathered a lot of useful drivers and tuned them a bit to adapt to your smartphone, particularly Snapdragon 845 platform. So if you are using 845 chips, you can definitely check this out. I have linked the Project Renegade and a step-by-step tutorial in the description below. The installation process is like a mess. You will experience constant crashes, blue screen of death, and either of those happens, you may.
That's kind of cursed. Seeing a blue screen on an Android phone looks really cursed.
Have to reset the phone start from the very beginning. So after centuries of tinkering, tweaking, and praying to the father of Windows, here we are, the one and only Windows 11. Let's see, seems like the touchscreen works, but the UI is kind of terrible. So you definitely need a mouse and keyboard to set everything up.
Yeah.
But anyway, this is the Windows 11 desktop on a smartphone. Look at the start menu, and you can.
It looks terrible.
Swipe up to unlock.
Oh, it works.
That actually feels like a Windows phone is still alive. The screen and
F for Windows
DPI,
Phone.
well, it looks much more like a PC now. Take a look at the specs. We got 8 CPU cores from Snapdragon 845 chip, 8 gigs of RAM, and of course the GPU, Adreno 630.
I'm just baffled that it's just working. It's just working.
Looks like the GPU drivers is working just fine. So maybe we should run some benchmarks. we got a bit over 1,000 on Cinebench R23 multi-core and a stunning 250 on single
Microsoft
core.
killed it itself. It doesn't deserve an F. Dude, that's harsh.
To finish the whole
Windows Phone was cool,
It's really
okay?
painful to make this video.
It wasn't...
But
Okay, actually, hold on. Wait, let me defend myself. Windows Phone was cool looking. And that's all it was. It was cool looking. It didn't do jack, but it was cool. Aesthetically. That's the only thing it had going for them, and that's the only thing that's the only point I'll give them. Okay? That's the only point I'm giving them, is that it looked cool.
Cinebench is an x86 app and does not natively support ARM. It's really not that bad. After all, we are emulating desktop chips with an old smartphone processor, and the multi-core performance is still on par with an, let's say, 4th gen Intel mobile chip, which is still fine, I think. And for the GPU, we got about 2900 on the...
Live tells were a good
Cinebench
idea that
Light
widgets
Gray.
did better.
That's
Okay,
about the same as
fine.
a GT630 GPU. That's like...
I like that we're comparing these to really old graphics card and processors. Still, though, pretty good. Like, good.
8 years ago, I guess. But anyway, I think we definitely had chance to run some modern games on it. And let's do it! The first question we are going to ask, you bet, can it run Crysis? I mean, the most power-hungry Crysis 3. Here we go! We got an AMD logo showing on a smartphone. How weird is that? Technically, it's not a lie since Adreno GPU originated
Also,
from
I guess
AMD technologies back in 2008.
Yeah, that's also true. I love
the
that
menu
pack.
looks very promising at a stable 60
Ooh.
FPS. Looks like we got a native 1080p res, and I will be super surprised if this even runs. Oh, wait a minute. Almost forgot about the thermals. Yeah, the phone is burning right now. I guess we should add an active cooler on that to make sure it doesn't explode. Alright, moment of truth. Did it really run Crysis? It works! Apparently we're not getting a lot of frame rates here and the game is a bit janky, but hey, it works! And that is amazing! Have you ever seen such graphics on a smartphone? Let's try to walk and shoot a bit. It's not really that playable, but still, I'm super satisfied with this. I mean, yeah, we are getting single-digit frame rate, but remember, this is 1080p resolution. Desktop level graphics, so if we can lower the resolution down, it might be actually playable, right? But the problem is, we can't really switch res easily on the smartphone. Neither from the desktop, nor inside the game. So if you want to lower the res down, you need to be a little bit creative. Luckily, with the help of the window mode, you can change the resolution to anything you want. So what we can do here is setting the res down to 540p, let's say, with window mode, and then use the Windows magnifier to enlarge the window size, so it looks like a full screen.
Close enough.
Genius idea, right? As expected, we got around.
Have you ever seen the Windows Phone that had a VR headset?
and
No.
That is totally
What?
playable.
Oh, wait.
Okay, forgot what I said. We can only get about 10 something frames per second when actually playing. The frame drops a lot in complicated things like this with trees and other stuffs, and I guess the problem right now is a CPU bottleneck. This might not be a great gaming experience, but hey, it's a 3-year-old smartphone, remember? And we are running the notorious Crysis 3, so I think this is more than enough. Can
Add it
it
to me
run
share later if you
Crysis?
want. Okay,
Yes.
we'll maybe do it next time.
And now let's try
But, like-
some other games like CS.
Yo, this is pretty dope.
Since we have run Crysis with no issue, this should be a piece of cake. And guess what? It definitely runs better than Crysis. We are at a native 1080p and we got around 20 to 30 frames per second on average. That is pretty smooth.
Yo, imagine getting wrecked by the guy who's playing CS:GO on their Windows-powered Android smartphone.
So why don't we just have some fun with it?
Now this is a portable gamer setup. This is what mobile esports should be, honestly.
Well, playing CSGO on a smartphone doesn't really make you more competitive, but that is definitely a unique experience and that is a lot of fun, I think. Maybe we should try something else. Something even crazier.
Ooh. Oh, is he playing a driving sim?
Yes, this is Euro Truck Simulator 2. Since we have all the USB ports, connecting a steering wheel is not too much of a problem. Using a steering wheel to control a device that is even smaller than the steering wheel itself is quite interesting, let's say. Okay, games like Euro Truck Simulator are not really that power hungry, but seems like it performs worse than Crysis. That's a bit weird. Maybe we should take a look at the task manager, and we can see the GPU usage is even lower than 30%.
Oh no, there's a bottleneck again.
In fact, this happens in quite a lot of games. For example, in Skyrim, you almost never fully utilize your GPU under low res. At the first moment, you can get a frame rate about as high as 40 frames per second.
Skyrim!
The camera to a complicated thing.
Teach the phones with Sky. Teach the kids with Skyrim.
But luckily, some games we tried actually had a really good performance. This is Tomb Raider running on a smartphone. At 1080p, we got a solid 20 frames per second, no drops, no problems at all. This is a real AAA title and it's got really decent graphics. So it's a really impressive performance. And if we lower the res to 540p and zoom in, you know what? We can get a 30, 40, or even 50 frames per second. That is...
It's almost running.
Seriously,
it's almost running perfectly well.
Laptop back in 2013, the frame rate is not even higher than that. So should I say this is the flagship graphic quality of mobile gaming? It's just unbelievable. Oh right, this game even supports AMD's TraceFX effects, which makes Lara Croft's hair a graphic card burner. Maybe we can try a little bit on our smartphone, and wow, we got it! TraceFX on Snapdragon GPUs. Seems like we didn't get any problems other than losing some frames.
The fact that it's still working is always like the most impressive thing to me here. Like, jeez.
But hey,
technology,
look at her hairs,
am I right?
The beautiful hairs. That worth trying, right? Looks like we tortured this smartphone a bit too hard, but hard is never enough, and I think we should try something even bigger. Maybe ray tracing? Well, it's not completely impossible though. Crytek, the developer of Crysis, has supported a special RT with their CE5 engine. Even your GPU does not have any RT cores or hardware accelerating, you can still run ray tracing. They have this demo called Neon Noir, which you can download for free. So let's try that on our smartphone. We are now in the menu and my cursor
I can't wait for it to not just to die inside.
Wow, it's actually running. So I guess that ray tracing does work on Snapdragon 845.
Gaming.
The frame rate here is a bit... Well, we got a 0.2 FPS. That is 1 frame every 5 seconds. That feels like an eternity. Like gaming on Cinema 4D, if you know what I mean. Actually, we are not even using GPU at all. And after some works are done, we think it might be a problem related to Qualcomm's GPU drivers. Those tiny old GPUs just won't run 64-bit games at all. Instead, the games are running on a virtual GPU simulated by CPU. No wonder why the performance is so bad. The same thing happens in GTA 5. You can definitely enter the game, but got a frame rate lower than 1 frames per second.
God dang it, bottlenecking.
Playing GTA 5 on a smartphone. That is really something everyone's dreaming about, right? I wish we can really achieve that. But anyway, this is the end of today's video, and I think we have done enough with this smartphone. And
like, there's just wild stuff you can do Android phones are so cool for this reason, and I love them. Just wild. Anyway. Anyway. Okay. So, that was very interesting to watch, wasn't that? That was cool. Let's go to another video. Let's see here. Ooh, yeah, let's go to my personal favorite. The thing that I love, like, just kind of looking at and staring at. Let's look at them, Omni wheels.
Time I built a giant Omni wheel. An Omni wheel can move in multiple directions because it has lots of smaller wheels around its circumference, so it can roll like a normal wheel or slide sideways. Normally, you'd use at least 3 Omni wheels on a vehicle so that you can move or rotate in any direction. But in this video, I'm going to put my giant Omni wheel on the front of a bicycle, and with some clever electronics, I'm going to control the wheel so I can ride it. I'm using the back end of the bike from the Maker's Secret Santa Christmas video, which Colin Furs left on my driveway. I'll need to modify the bike, so I checked it wasn't Colin's bike from his childhood or anything, and he said it sounds cool. As I mentioned last time, the wheel is going to be mounted the wrong way round on the front of the bike, so the 2 wheels make a T-shape. So first of all, I need to make some modifications to the front forks of the bike. Colin already modified the front forks to get the bigger wheel on that he made for the Maker's Secret Santa, so I'm going to cut some of that off and keep some of it and weld some additional bits on so that I can make my axle point at 90 degrees to where it normally would. So I just cut that up with an angle grinder and cleaned off all the paint so that I can weld to it. And that made it nice and shiny. Eventually we'll respray it, but for now that'll do. So I've cut some pieces of 26mm internal diameter tubular steel, and I got myself a little miter saw which seems to cut through that with no problem, and I just cleaned all of that up so that it's nice and shiny and we get some nice clean welds, or at least the best that I can do. So those 2 new pieces fit right onto part of the extension that Colin put on, and that gives me a really long set of front forks. So the next thing to do is cut up some box section steel. Not sure if the miter saw's going to cut this. But yep, seems fine, seems to go through like a knife through butter, so that's going to be a really useful tool for the future. So let's just drill some holes in that. I'm using a hole cutting saw so that I can make a hole for a big axle, and also some even bigger holes so that we can put that tube in, which is 30mm on the outside.
Have I ever mentioned how much I enjoy just engineering stuff like this? I think that's kind of obvious at this point, but I just wanted to say it again.
Welding, well, since the last video at least, for about 2 years before that. But this is round, which is a bit more tricky as well than straight lines. But I should think I'll be able to weld it so it's sound enough, although the welds aren't going to look particularly pretty. So I just welded all that round to fit the extensions onto the existing front forks. It's a bit difficult to get into the middle there and to get the TIG rod in, but in the end I managed to weld it all the way round, and I'm pretty sure that it's going to be okay. Normally every weld I do looks better than the last one I did. These are okay, there's a few holes in, but it's going to hold okay. So now we just need to weld those onto the piece of box section steel so that we can mount the axle through the other hole at 90 degrees.
Engineering. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit since most of it's like just basically him attaching things together. Oh, there we go.
And clean up, we've got an aluminium plate which is 6mm thick to mount the motor. And the motor is the one I normally use in smaller robots, although they're really powerful. It's a 6374 149 kV motor. And that's got a T5 pulley mounted on it, and we're going to use that with a 2-stage belt reduction to drive the wheel. So I've got an intermediate 2-to-1 pulley which has got a T5 on one side and an HTD profile on the other side. And that's braced between the aluminium and another 3D print.
And basically he's going to put it together to make sure that... There we go.
But before we carry on with that...
sponsors.
To check it
How
out
many
now,
sponsors? There's like 2.
There's a plate on the back
Oh,
of
there
the
we go.
motor with a bearing to hold the back of the motor, and that's also going to be where the encoder mounts. And I'm using an O-Drive 3.656 volt version.
It's already so complicated just to get a wheel set up. And like, here's like the little demo, I think, right?
I can easily get to the controls, and there's a separate USB.
Do you ever just want to ride a bike that looks like this? I would be too scared.
Boost bank battery, so I've got a separate clean power supply to power the electronics. On the handlebar, I've got a control panel with a switch, which is going to switch it in and out of balancing mode, and I've also got an emergency stop button that resets the O drive and disarms the motor. I've built quite a lot of balancing robots in the past, and in fact there's a balancing robots playlist in my channel.
Look at him go, buddy.
In one of the recent videos I talked quite a lot about position hold algorithms and how the balancing works, so essentially I'm doing something very similar here with a PID controller that allows us to tailor the characteristics of how the motor velocity runs with reference to the amount of lean that we have in the robot measured by the inertial measurement unit.
You guys aren't falling asleep, right? This is again going to be on the test.
So essentially,
I'm just
in one direction, the wheel
showing
drives
off.
that way, and as we lean in the other direction,
oh, look, auto balancing.
The other way, and we can change the acceleration with the integral term of the PID controller. Now, I was going to break out the P, I, and D terms to the three knobs.
I think it's neat.
Bike control
also,
so I can alter it while I'm riding it. But actually, it was pretty easy to tune up.
Auto balancing for this scares me. Oh my god, no.
Well, even though I don't have much space to test it here, and I'm pretty happy with how that works. Of course, bigger, heavier things like me on top of a bike
small
fall
fear
over more slowly, so it's actually much easier to tune than a small robot that moves at a much higher velocity and can thrash around much more because it doesn't have as much mass. But how well can I actually ride it in a big open space? So first of all, I lock the wheel in place just with the motor holding power and switching that red switch off so it isn't trying to balance to see if I can ride it like a normal bike. So the wheel is just locked in place there, and actually it rides pretty well. I wasn't sure what was going to happen as I leant over onto
that's weird looking.
On the wheel, but it seems to work okay. There's a little bit of backlash in that wheel, and it's a little bit backdrivable, so it's slightly spongy. And
I love how weird it looks.
But ultimately,
it looks so weird,
like a normal bike. It's got skateboard wheels on, so lumps and bumps are, well, a bit like going over them on a skateboard, but actually it rides okay. And as we know, I can already balance on it, at least on carpet, which has a damping effect. So on a smooth surface, that works just as well actually. Those wheels are slightly flexible all the way around the circumference.
Omnidirectional bike.
That works. And what I should be able to do without putting my feet down is switch off balancing mode and then ride away like a normal bike.
Oh.
And I'm pretty happy I can do that. But can I turn it on again and go back into balancing mode without putting my feet down? Well, that's a lot trickier, and some of these I failed because I didn't actually turn it on properly and I just fell over, and one of them something very strange happened. But after a bit of practice of slowing down and turning it on, it's actually possible to go into balancing mode without putting my feet down, and then switch it off again and go back into not balancing mode and ride it like a normal bike.
It almost looks like something normal you'd see.
Spin round and ride off again.
It almost does. Just a little bit, just almost.
Yep, just about. It's going to take a bit of practice. But there we go, so I'm pretty happy with the results of this. It takes a bit of getting used to actually have a leap of faith and lean sideways without trying to just lean the bike and stay upright, which of course is a way of making it go
it's so close.
Because normally on a bike you really don't want to be leaning over when you're stationary because you're used to falling over. So you pretty much have to forget what you know about riding a bike when it's in balancing mode, and then that means you can actually balance and ride smoothly without it being really jittery because you're automatically trying to kind of pull yourself upright, which is what you'd normally do on a normal bike. But the question you want answering, of course, is what happens if I try and ride it normally, but with balancing mode on as well? And that's definitely the time to forget everything you know about riding a normal bike. It's very, very counterintuitive. So here you can see I'm trying to steer left, but I'm actually not going left, and the wheel's still trying to take me right. And this is because when you steer on a bike, you steer a little bit in the opposite direction before you steer in the direction you want to go in, which of course just makes the bike go more and more in the direction which is not the direction you intended to go in. So what you have to do is have an absolute leap of faith, forget how to ride a bike basically, lock your arms and try and lock the steering wheel, and just try and lean in the direction you want to go.
Oh, it's so weird.
Normally ride a bike. But after a bit of practice,
I kind of like it though.
Better if you go almost so you're not going at all, so going really slowly and stopping all the time and just getting used to leaning left and right to steer. So this is pretty much the first time I've ever tried it in this footage, But you can eventually get used to the idea of not really steering, even though that's really hard, and then just leaning to steer to try and go round corners. It is a bit strange though, and if you forget what you're doing, you have to really concentrate basically, otherwise you just get thrown in the opposite direction. It's pretty cool though, being able to just stop on the spot and having it balance, which is also really counterintuitive. So you just have to really forget how to ride a bike and learn to ride this one instead.
It's such a weird Segway type device. I love it.
And then ride off again.
Oh.
And it pretty much works okay whether you have balancing mode on or off. I am planning some bigger projects like this. Basically, if you look at my channel for the last year, all the clever balancing robots and things like that, I'm going to have a go at making some of those projects bigger. Hopefully,
I don't know what to say because it surprised me. This surprised me like a good amount because I'm just like, what the hell? Because like I was giggling like when I was seeing him like.
Also, it's slightly spongy and it will.
Like,
so you pretty much have to forget what you know about riding a bike when it's in balancing mode.
Like like I was giggling because I saw the wheel just start spinning while he was moving forward and wasn't really able to change his direction, and I thought that was funny. I know could this be future technology? Probably not. I don't think I wanted to, but it's cool. There's benefits to it, I think. Now let's see here. We're near the end. Although I might need to do like maybe last two videos, probably last one video. Let's go with history. Let's do history. So this one is from the Science Elf, of course, and the video is called The Development Disaster Behind macOS. History.
Coming in at second place at nearly 13% of the desktop computer market, Apple's macOS is a reasonably popular operating system, with plenty of dedicated fans behind it. Financially, Apple is doing better than it ever has before, but in the 90s, that couldn't have been further from the truth. Between increasingly unpopular products like the Newton and the Pippin, and the continued rise in popularity of Wintel computers, it seemed like all of their product lines were collapsing at once, and even Apple's cash cow, the Macintosh, wasn't immune. To really understand the issues with the macOS, though, we have to go back at least 10 years earlier to the introduction of the Lisa. Being the first computer Apple released with a graphical interface,
also, I don't know why, this boy looks silly. I know he's a piece of history, but he looks very silly. Like, the keyboard goes here, sure. But it looks like he's wearing a printer as a hat. Like, this is not fashionable.
The machine was quite the powerhouse, with a 5 MHz processor, dual internal floppy drives, and 1 MB of RAM. Of course, the machine also came with a $10,000 price tag, over $25,000 today. Needless to say, the Lisa did not do well, but a very similar project in Apple was able to see some success. The Macintosh was designed to be a more affordable Lisa, and at a quarter of the price, it had sold almost as many units as the Lisa had in its entire lifetime, in just 1 month. Of course, to drop the cost as much as the Mac did, a few corners had to be cut. The Mac, for example, had only a slightly faster processor than the Lisa, a single disk drive at less than half the capacity of the Lisa's Twiggy drives, and probably most notably, only 128K of RAM. To pull this off, the Macintosh operating system needed to be pared down as well, so features like protected memory and multitasking had to go. Given a few years and a few increasingly powerful Macintosh models, the Mac had for the most part caught up hardware-wise with the Lisa, but with the exception of the incredibly limited desk accessories, the macOS wasn't really designed to run more than one program at a time. The solution, hacked together by Andy Hertzfeld, was inspired by a similar program found on the IBM PC. Switcher, eventually called Multifinder, would allow the user to load and unload programs from memory, so that by clicking in the top corner of the screen, the user could quickly switch from one running application to another.
Remember that this is like the 80s, so this shit is innovative.
It didn't require much modification to the Mac operating system, but still managed to achieve true multitasking. Apple included it with System 5 and onward.
RAM, that's the important thing.
In the mid to late
RAM
80s,
was
Apple was constantly
expensive.
pushing out updates to the Mac operating system, to the point where a new version was essentially an annual occurrence. Besides adding things like Multi-Finder though, the updates were mostly bug fixes and adding support for new hardware. Following the release of System 6 in 1988, things began to slow down, and it would be another 3 years until 1991 when System 7, a major overhaul to the macOS, would come out, introducing among other important features a cooperative multitasking model.
You knew RAM was big.
One of the consequences of a
RAM
cooperative
total in their
multitasking
name.
model is that the programs in it have to, well, cooperate. That is, the operating system gives complete control of the computer to a program with the expectation that that control will eventually be given back. Theoretically this works as each program takes turns running on the processor, but this model completely falls apart the moment one program refuses to give up control, usually because it's crashed before it could return to the OS. Because the computer is stuck in the crashed program and the OS can't regain control, none of the other programs can run either, so the moment one program freezes, it brings the entire system down with it. This wasn't much of a problem at first, but as programs became more complex and better hardware allowed users to run more programs at once, the chances of a system crashing bug occurring became greater and greater. The macOS wasn't the only graphical operating system on the market by this time either, let alone the only multitasking one. Windows had started out in 1985 as a crude graphical shell to DOS, and while the second version, and even more so Windows 3 in 1990, expanded it into a more fully featured operating system, there were still plenty of inconsistencies, unintuitive controls, and legacy specifications that made it look pretty clunky compared to macOS. Microsoft recognized this, of course, and after catching up significantly with Windows 3.1, hoped to close the gap completely in the next few years with a little project called Chicago, what would eventually be known as Windows 95.
There it is.
Management at Apple wasn't oblivious to these issues though, and as far back as 1988, a team had gathered together to discuss the future evolution of the macOS. Easy short-term improvements to the OS, like adding color, were written on blue index cards, while more advanced features, like adding a new, more stable, preemptive multitasking system, went onto the pink index cards, with extremely long-term plans going onto red cards. The pink and blue goals were eventually given to the pink and blue teams, which would work in parallel to produce the next two versions of macOS. All of the ideas from the blue team became the massive overhaul System 7 that I mentioned earlier, but things didn't quite go so easily for the pink team. In 1991, the same year that System 7 had shipped, CEO John Sculley made an offer that would have largely been considered heresy 10 years earlier, and reached out to IBM to work together on Apple's next-generation operating system, a project that came to be known as Taligent. Since the pink team, and with them the next macOS, had moved mostly outside of the company, not much was being done regarding the future of the operating system, with most improvements being through patches by the blue team that continued to stress the already unstable System 7. Of course, letting the OS become less and less stable wasn't much of a concern, since Taligent would fix it soon enough, right? Wrong.
I'm okay.
The Taligent project itself was a disaster, specifically because of fighting between the Apple and IBM employees over the suspicion that IBM would end up taking control over the project from Apple. What would become a self-fulfilling prophecy, as Apple backed out of the deal in 1995 and IBM finished Taligent to less than mediocre reception. And there Apple was, with an increasingly unstable operating system on one hand and their 4 years of backup work down the drain. They needed a replacement OS fast, and in doing so cooked up an infamous little project known as Copeland, codenamed after the composer Aaron Copland. Claiming to have essentially a complete OS rewrite out for developers in 1995, ready for public release the following year, the task seemed impossible, and that's because at face value it pretty much was. Instead, the first stage of Copeland was just to introduce a kernel to the OS, adding in preemptive multitasking instead of the unstable in-place cooperative model. At the same time, to avoid having to rewrite all of the existing system code and libraries, all old Macintosh code will be run in a virtual memory location called the Blue Box. After that release shipped, Apple would rewrite all the Blue Box code and transition fully to the new platform. Of course, just like with Taligent, things weren't quite so simple, but this time the problem was mostly within Apple. Copeland was the project to be on at Apple, so it wasn't uncommon for developers from side projects that had started in the Taligent days to want to leave those projects to be involved with Copeland. The managers, in interest of self-preservation, attempted to counter this practice by adding their projects to Copeland. That way nobody left, and the developers would still be happy to be working on a piece of Copeland. As 1995 went on, this practice became more and more popular.
I can almost see why this is a bad.
The next year, at the Worldwide Developers Conference, around the time Apple had planned to have Copeland publicly released, they showed a demo of Macintosh System 8. It wasn't pretty. Most of the OS lacked basic interactions like text editing, and the system was so fragile that demo staff had to be on hand just to replace hard drives that the system corrupted during a crash. Said one commentator, "It was incredible they even let us see the beast." As if Copeland wasn't already a victim of feature creep from internal politics at Apple, the fact that the system was already late prompted Apple to justify that by promising more features, with the then CEO Gil Amelio in the middle of the conference allegedly promising symmetric multitasking, a major design change, by the end of the year. Of course, to implement those features,
I can already feel like he's like writing, like digging his own grave. It's not pretty feeling.
A developer release of Copeland went out a year late at the end of 1996, but the software was so buggy that the OS could just crash from sitting idle. There were suggestions that Copeland would be out by 1997, though officially the release date was just sometime. It was apparent to Amelio at that point that the fragmented development of Copeland was unlikely to ever coalesce into one revolutionary operating system. And so he called in a friend, Ellen Hancock, who had worked with Gil at his previous job bringing National Semiconductor to profitability. If anyone was going to get the Copeland dev team back on track, it was her. Hancock's first decision upon seeing the state of Copeland was to call it off. There was no future for the OS currently being developed, and Apple should instead consider buying an existing operating system and reworking it into a macOS. A few offers were brought up, like B, created by Apple veteran Jean-Louis Gasset, which was too expensive, Solaris, a favorite of Hancock, largely seen as unworkable to Amelio, and Apple's version of a deal with the devil, Windows NT. Avoiding the almost certain backlash of what little Mac users remained, Amelio went with his one last option, Next Step. Since 1985, the company Next had made a name for itself by selling so-called 3M computers to higher educational markets. 3M standing for 1 megabyte of memory, 1 megapixel display resolution, and 1 megaflop of processing power. Next never was the most popular brand for the general public, but it was tied to some pretty famous successes in computing, such as being the first web server, as well as having the first web browser being written on it. The other big thing behind Next was its founder, Steve Jobs. Seeing that Next Step was exactly the operating system Apple was looking for, they bought out Next completely in December of 1996 and brought Jobs back into the company he had co-founded as an advisor. As for Copeland, the project was officially cancelled in favor of porting Next Step over to the Macintosh. The process of doing so was going to take a while though, and in the interim, Apple bought up a bunch of third-party extensions for System 7 to incorporate them into the operating system, as well as working on improving stability in System 7.6. Given some more time, features like customizable themes and a multi-threaded Finder, originally slated for Copeland.
Hold up. What in the flying hell is this? What is this? It almost looks like, dare I say, I actually don't know what I dare say. Looks like kid pics. Copeland was fucked. Honestly, that looks pretty fucked.
Would make their way into macOS 8. And even later, macOS 8 did see some simplistic support for the preemptive multitasking system that had prompted the development of Copeland to begin with. macOS 9, released in 1999, brought more improvements to various elements of the Macintosh operating system, though more importantly, it marked the start of Apple's transition to their new Next architecture, introducing libraries like Carbon that would be used in the new macOS. Subsequent versions were designed with virtualization in mind, so that compatible programs could still be run on the new macOS architecture. And in 2001, it happened. macOS 10 was ready for its debut.
Oh, we got it.
After nearly a decade of planning Apple's next generation OS,
there it is.
After the failed deals with IBM, after the disastrous internal politics of mid-90s Apple, and after buying out Next and shaking up the leadership, the OS had finally shipped. And the general response was? Apple had made great strides with revamping the OS with the Darwin kernel, beautifying the user interface through the new Aqua system theme, adding new UI elements like the dock, all while still supporting macOS 9 software through virtualization. At the same time though, OS X had poor support for external hardware out of the box. Some found the UI changes to be less intuitive than macOS 9, and the flashy new Aqua theme and effects tended to make the OS somewhat unresponsive on older hardware.
To be fair, I did really like Aqua as a theme. I thought it was very cool and cute. It was very cute.
Some were skeptical of the improvements in Mac OS X, with Jeff Raskin, an original Mac team member,
It's
calling it
lickable.
nothing more than a face.
Oh yeah, no, I'd lick that.
Generally, many users.
I'd totally lick that. It would taste like plastic, but I would lick it. I don't know what that if that was an admission of anything, but like I would lick that. Would you? Wouldn't you lick that? Anyone? Anyone?
Decided to wait it out.
Oh, it's a Steve Jobs quote. Okay, well, Steve Jobs was clearly right. It's very lickable.
Short. Jobs himself had to counter this concern by throwing a mock funeral for Mac OS 9 at the 2002 conference, urging developers to move on to only OS X development.
Please stop.
He worked tirelessly on our behalf, always hosting our applications, never refusing a command, always at our beck and call, except occasionally when he forgot who he was and needed to be restarted.
At least there's humor there.
And more importantly, more powerful generations of Macs to support the increasingly demanding operating system, OS X caught on.
Oh, there we go.
Annual updates
now we're at where we're at.
Copeland was far from just a failure, and OS X was far from just a rewrite. In fact, many of the side projects shoehorned into Copeland did eventually become programs on OS X, like video chatting, which would become FaceTime, and desktop search programs like Spotlight. Even the Apple Newton, a portable product out the same time as Copeland was being developed, would be reworked into the handwriting recognition program Inkwell. Jobs had said at the launch of OS X that the technology behind the new Mac OS would be able to support it for 20 years to come. Nearly 20 years later, that prediction has become more or less true. While the OS has gone through 13 iterations already, at the end of the day, it's still Mac OS X. And if you think about it, OS X has actually been around and supported for longer than the original first 9 versions of Mac OS combined.
Wow. History? Well, I hope you guys enjoyed yourself. It was a very interesting time. Obviously, it was a bit late, yeah. But thank you guys for sticking in with me. Very much love you all. Love your cute faces. Mwah. Anyway, so this is probably going to be it for this week. Next week, I'm going to figure out a schedule eventually. Keyword eventually. I have no idea. And yeah, make sure you guys save before you go and have a good one, all right? Bye now. Bye. Bye.